Greetings, Carl Richards here, and welcome to another episode of Elementality. So excited to chat today with David Hunter from the middle of Pennsylvania. How are you, David?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I've been following your work for quite some time. So the pleasure is mine.
Oh, so nice of you. So nice of you. Let's start where I always like to start these conversations, like at the beginning. Walk me through real quickly. I'm actually really curious about this because I don't know your story. Why did you get into the business of giving financial advice?
Yeah, like I'd love to say that there's some heartfelt, like great story that I belong in this industry. But honestly, the truth of it is right after college, I was a strength and conditioning coach at the time for I know, right, like complete 180.
No, I think you're the second one in like 10 people that
Yeah,
has
I mean,
some
I
strength and
couldn't.
conditioning
Yeah,
background.
it's interesting. I was doing that for quite some time. It was actually more of my educational background at the time, and I really enjoyed doing it. I worked a lot with athletes. Our boss was actually aspiring to be an NFL strength coach, and he is that today, so kudos to him. So it was really neat to work underneath him, and we worked with adults as well. So we kind of got the whole gamut of folks that we worked with. And while it was fun, I guess at some point I woke up in my mid-20s and I was like, I don't know if I can work 12 or 13 hours every day physically helping people, lifting people, and like at the end of the day the pay like really wasn't that great. So I kind of started to look around and say, if I'm going to start to build something different, I feel like I'm a little behind. I need to do that now. And fortunately, with the clients that I had, we worked with doctors and financial advisors and teachers and all of these folks that I just kind of started to listen a little bit closer as we were training them as to their stories and as to their struggles and if they like their job. And long story short, to be fair, there were two financial advisors. The one that really started to mentor me and actually ended up offering me a position at the RIA that I'm at now. So that's how I got into the business. I think it's very different from why I want to stay here. But that's kind of the short story of how I got here.
Well, I'm really curious about why you want to stay now, but can you think of just one? Was there like a little spark? Was there one conversation? Was there something? Because at some point you made a decision like, I'd like to go do that.
Yeah.
What was it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it was just an observance of, for one, and before I go there, for one, I was very frustrated with just not having time, not having any sort of like social life outside of work, and just not really being able to invest back into myself. And as I looked around, like I was curious by this financial advisor that could, not every day, but kind of roll in at 2 p.m. or even 8 a.m. and have these workouts. And it wasn't a flashy thing that I was drawn to, but just kind of a lifestyle that they had time for their family. They seemingly had time to be with their kids and to spend on themselves to be able to go through these workouts. And that's something for me that I just wanted to learn a little bit more about. And that was probably like a 2-year process of just kind of nudging and poking and saying, hey, can you like share with me a little bit more about the work that you do? And
Yeah.
fortunately, I had the mentor that was able to do that. I'm not sure if that
Yeah.
answered the question, but
No, that's perfect. What keeps you now? Because you
yeah,
mentioned like
so
it's not the same as because I got into the business by accident. I applied to be a security guard, right? I thought security and securities were the same thing. What kept me though was this really crazy behavior, like humans and their money. And I've been endlessly fascinated by that. Like what has kept you in the business speaking largely?
yeah, you start going through the training and you're doing the Series 7, at least at the time, the Series 7 and 66 and all that stuff. You very much how to value a stock, a bond, and like Carl, I literally thought that's all this job was.
Yeah.
And hopefully I can find some people that have money and I can help them invest it. And the further I get into this business, like, look, that's a super important part in my opinion of what we do, but actually helping people like craft a financial plan that I don't want to steal your words, but you say it better than anybody else, just aligns people's values and what's important to them back to their money. And once I started having some conversations around that and success with that, just to see how people could grow, and actually start to achieve what they were looking, not just in their life, or sorry, not just in their like portfolio or Roth IRA, but actually find the happiness they were looking for in their life. That for me has been something that sparked a passion that I have. And like, quite honestly, it's hard to turn it off, right? Like I'm actually working on trying to put things away at the end of the night, but like I'm just fascinated by it, and I love to explore, especially the challenges that my clients face.
That's super interesting. Can you walk me through, like, can you think of an example recently or a story, particularly around, you use two words, you use the alignment word, but you also use like happiness. Like, I don't tell anyone this, nobody's listening anyway, but don't tell anybody, but I don't really care much about money. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a secret tool, a door to have conversations about what really matters. And you quickly went there and pointed to this idea of happiness. Like, can you think of any experiences or stories recently that you've had with clients that have helped reinforce that?
Yeah, I mean, there's several, but like one that comes to mind, it would have been the most recent that I had with a client. And maybe I'll just preface it with, I work with lawyers predominantly. I have a lot of clients that I worked with before I decided to focus on lawyers, but as of late, it's been an intention to work with lawyers. And I'm busy. I know you're busy, Carl. Like, we're all busy. But when we think about lawyers and the time that they have, they tend to just be overwhelmed, like entirely overwhelmed, whether it's from a workload that's put on them from a boss, or themselves if they're a business owner, but like they're always trying to get that gold star. And to the point where a lot of them are facing burnout, and they're facing just unsatisfaction with their job. Like it's kind of like we talked about how so many of us financial professionals stumble into it for whatever reason, and we stay because of other reasons. They're like super intentional, right? Like they sign up for law, they sign up for this big endeavor, go to law school, get the credentials, and then they kind of find out that like the actual job or the type of law that they're practicing doesn't really align with their core values. And like, to be quite honest with you, Carl, they just become unhappy people. So for me, I think that's the type of work that we should be or could be really helping these people with. And to get back to your question, I had a client who said, hey, I can't even like go to the water cooler in the office because the clock on my desk is ticking, or it should be ticking.
Wow.
And for those who aren't familiar, not every attorney, but a lot of attorneys bill based on billable hour, and every 6 minutes they're kind of keeping track of this. So she's like, Dave, like, I can't even do that when I'm sitting in traffic. She lives in a really busy city. If I was sitting in traffic and the time's ticking, like I literally feel like I'm losing money. I'm not productive. At some point, somebody's going to shoot me an email and say, hey, why weren't you productive with your time? So like, that's kind of the unhappiness and stress that that you probably heard from me when I first said that.
Yeah. And what is it about the experience that they have? And I'm not asking you to take credit for it. Often we're just the ones that facilitate the space, but what is it about the experience that they have that allows that to, at least the hope that may change?
Yeah. Quite honestly, in my experience, it's just defining their purpose. And just trying to understand, why are we working? What are we doing this for? And sometimes that's an incremental or micro change in the way they do their job. Or sometimes it's literally just putting it together and saying, hey, you have a lot of stress with the work that you do. That's actually okay. Like, and we can manage, or you can manage that. But if there's something that I can help out with framing where you're going from a financial standpoint, would that help? Would it help to delegate some of this responsibility? And not only that, like, can we actually map out where you would like to be and how we can get there? Like, would that help kind of some of the stress that you experience? and often it's just that practice, Carl, of putting it all together for somebody that allows them to experience just a little bit more freedom with their time.
Yeah, Dave, wait. You're a financial advisor. What are you talking about purpose? What do you mean? Like, I thought this is about the, can't you show me the best performing mutual fund kid?
Yeah, it's funny. I was just crafting like a LinkedIn piece before I hopped on here about that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know what I can say to that other than I think it's really important. I just think sometimes, whether it's an attorney or really anybody, if we're not fixated on the purpose behind why we're investing or what we're doing or where we're trying to go, we can often get derailed pretty quickly by inflation or interest rates or who's in president holding the office, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It always reminds me of the old Stephen Covey quote that like the last thing you want to do is spend your whole life climbing a ladder only to find out it's leaning against the wrong wall. And it does seem like I have a number of, I don't want to pick on attorneys, but attorneys and CPA, like people who do billable hour work, private equity, distressed consulting firms. And in that 45 to 55-year-old cohort, you often hear that exact question of like, look, I made senior partner. I did what everybody was what I was told to do. And yet it feels like, at least for me, this is the wrong wall. Right. And so I think the idea of getting really clear about a sense of purpose, like and let me ask you a question, David, how many people have come into your office saying, would you help me craft my statement of financial purpose?
Yeah, zero, nobody.
Right. It's so interesting. So talk to me a little bit about that I call it a righteous trick, but that like, you think it's about investment products or the investment or the financial plan or the life insurance or the specific product. But it turns out there's a whole thing that sits underneath here to prevent you from climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. Like, how do you help people understand that this is the presenting problem, turns out isn't the thing? It matters, but what really matters is this. Before we can solve the presenting problem, it's really helpful to understand this stuff underneath. How have you seen people be resistant to that? How does that happen? Is it a conversation you have?
Yeah, I mean, and I'll be honest, like I'll just throw a shameless plug out there. I've been following your work, and the School of Advice is that what it's called, I think, has just been immensely helpful for me. So Carl, I stole your process. I literally I've kind of shifted. I mean, most clients come in and you kind of do the chit chat or whatever, and then usually it's, hey, I've got this old account, what do I do with it? Or some specific transactional question. And if that happens, I mean, if I don't get a chance to kind of to lead it a little bit, I'll just say, hey, that's super important. Like, we're definitely going to talk about that. And I probably have a solution for that. But before we get there, can we just kind of go back to step one here just for a second? And would it be okay if I asked you a few questions about where you're currently at? And for the most part, I mean, not even for the most part, like I've never had anybody that objected to that too hard.
Can you think, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit because I didn't tell you this before, but can you think of a story where you're like, wow, that was really helpful? I always tell that story about the doctor who discovered that, told her husband in my presence, right? I just want to have some time. She's an ER doctor. I just want to have some time so I can focus on having a family. And like, that was in the first meeting. Can you think of examples where you were like, look, it was super helpful to understand this process. And then there was change based on that?
Yeah. I mean, probably the last, first, I call it a first meeting, but the last first meeting that I had was with a couple who their childhood experiences around money were very different. And I didn't learn that until halfway through the meeting, like until we could get to that point. And I'll call him Steve. His name wasn't Steve. He was very fixated on like the work benefits and his percentage of savings, which is really good, but he was kind of wanted to keep going back to that. And I finally just had to say, hey, Steve, like that's really important. Like we're totally going to get there. But I just have a few questions for Cindy, we'll call her. Cindy, why is money important to you? And she just said, Dave, like it is important to me, but like I grew up with a lot of money. So like, to be honest with you, I never really had to do this or plan this out or anything like that. Like, I guess I'm very comfortable with it. And and Steve, immediately interrupted and said, well, like, that's why I'm so stressed about this. Like, we never had anything. So for me, I really need to get the answers to these questions. And so you could just kind of like feel like the tension between the two of them. And fortunately, we went deeper on that, and we were able to come to a place where they're both able to just to kind of share their experiences with money. And he's an old time buddy that, you know, finally became a client, but he texted me after the meeting and said, wow, that was really different. Like, thanks for that. That was good.
Yeah.
And I was new kind of to that process. So that was like the fuel that I needed to hear to say those conversations, even at least for me as an advisor, are a little bit uncomfortable at first, because we immediately want to dive into the advice of like what you should do with that ESPP, employee stock purchase plan, or 401k or whatever.
Yeah.
And unless we get some of that context, it's actually really hard to understand what's actually important to the client.
Totally. It's so interesting to me that, you know, the human beings that we call clients or prospective clients, I totally, like, I deeply empathize with why that's not what they think is going to happen, right? Like what we've all been taught, if we were taught anything about money, was that it was a math problem. And then we've got the financial pornography network talking about buy this, buy that, the economy. So we think that's all that's there.
Right.
But man, what really matters is the idea that, like, hey, growing up, this happened. Or I remember when my dad used to say, don't be spoiled. Or I just had a conversation with somebody today who was told repeatedly in her childhood, she was taught that you can either care about money or you can care about people. And like this sort of juxtaposition of like, if you care about money, you don't care about people.
Unreal.
And, you know, you realize like that stuff really informs. It's when you start to understand that a bit, you start to understand a bunch of the symptomatic things that we're seeing happening on the surface.
For sure.
You know, so there's the idea that afterwards a client would call and say, hey, thanks for that, is really, really cool.
Yeah. And I'll just say as well, I mean, this is with clients that have been with me for a few years probably, but, you know, when interest rates aren't favorable and inflation's high and the market's not doing what we want it to do in a given year, those conversations, like, to bring back, are super meaningful for clients, just to circle back. And because clients forget, like, I think one of the biggest risks we have as advisors is client remembering risk. So if we have that documented, that purpose document, if we have it where we're kind of not constantly showing it, but kind of bringing it up every once in a while, like, hey, do we have this right? Is this correct? Does this sound like you still? Whenever some of those questions come up that are really like in the moment, minute, like only looking 2 or 3 months in advance, just to be able to zoom out a little bit and be like, hey, remember when we talked about all this? Like, is that still correct? And usually they're like, yeah, that's still us. It just provides a lot of context to be able to answer their question without hammering like a spreadsheet or some sort of graph, right? That can be important, but like that's usually not what they were looking for. They needed some peace of mind and for someone to remind them of what they said was important to them.
Totally. Yeah. To me, like, that's the process of making good financial decisions over your life is the process of learning. Often it's the process of making trade-offs.
Yeah.
Unless there's unlimited resources, it's the process of making trade-offs. And when you're making a trade-off, you often need to say no. And the easiest way to say no is if you have a deeper yes.
Yeah.
And the deeper yes is often this, you know, this idea of like, hey, this is what you told me was important when we first met. Is this still true? So I really think that's one of the primary values of a good financial advisor is like, remind, at least in my words, what I want from my advisors, remind me what I said when I'm thinking about doing something silly, you know? Yeah. And so that's super helpful. Well, Dave, let's wrap up this way, because this has been super fun. And I could ask questions. I have like 17 questions I could ask you based on what you've said. But I want to keep this really, really sort of concise. So here's my like last question. If we were looking back 3 years from today, and let's say you're happy with the impact and the business 3 years from today, so January 19th, 2026, we're having the same conversation. What would have had to have happened? Like, what do you hope happens over the next 3 years in order for you to feel good about the impact you've had?
Wow. Yeah, super good question. I think that's changed for me. I'm on a mission to serve somewhere around 100 families, and there's reason for that, to do it well. But look, I think with some of the content, education, and things we're trying to provide, and will be coming down. Look, my hope is that my reach to be able to help some of these people who are kind of stuck in this cycle would be some sort of multiple of that. And like for me, I think the metric of measuring success would be having a benefit or having an impact across many lots and lots of attorneys that like maybe I don't even get to meet because my work has been sufficient enough for them to take and use it. So I think for me it would be and that's tough to measure maybe, but through educational content or listeners to a podcast, whatever it may be, having that extended reach, I think would be the biggest impact that for me would say that it was a successful 3 years.
And so extended reach, but what do you hope? This is a follow-up question. I promise that last one was the last one. It's not. How would you summarize what you hope the impact would be? On an individual level, what do you think the impact is?
Yeah, for that, giving people back balance to their life and time and just peace. And maybe I'm speaking particularly to the clients that I work with, but just restoring that sense of healthy relationship that they have with their work and their money, their families, their kids, their time. And that is ultimately what the benefit I hope would be from the work that I'm doing with my clients.
That's perfect. All I have to say to that is David Hunter in the middle of Pennsylvania. Amen.
Perfect. It's been fun. I appreciate it, Carl. It's been an honor to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. Cheers, my friend.
Cheers.